Cool. Welcome, everybody, to the first Steep, a collaborative live broadcast by me, Elyse Peterson, and Colin of Vaca Studio. Today, we are going to be doing a deep dive into the category of tea known as Shou Puerh, featuring a small batch Shou Puerh by a small tea grower, tea master in Nannuoshan in Yunnan, China. This is called small batch show, and we will learn why that word small batch is so important for this tea and actually for the entire category of tea, frankly, Colin.
Yeah.
What do you know about Shou Puerh?
So my understanding has a lot to do with the kind of Shou Puerh is a confusing term, I know, because Shou Puerh used to mean something different than what it means now. In that Shou Puerh, I know, used to refer to just aged, like tea that was aged over, like pu'er tea that was like aged over a certain amount. Is that accurate, or?
It's possible. I don't know about that story, but I've heard lots of different stories that even like
Yeah.
there's a difference between show and shu.
Yeah, and that's
That's all confusing, and I don't know if we want to be confusing people today. So
yeah,
I think we can stick with
with
the
the
basic.
yeah.
Yeah, but you're correct. Like Shangpur, which we have done on
Right.
this podcast before, is unfermented, but it's meant to be fermented over time. So
Right.
maybe 10, 20 years, it will completely change the tea from a greener tea to a, darker aged tea or a heicha. Heicha is, yeah, but Shou Puerh was developed mostly in like the 1970s as like a more kind of commodified version of that aged puer.
Say my
And
understanding has to do with it. There was like a demand in Hong Kong for aged pu'er, and there just wasn't enough supply, and so they kind of developed this process, right?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard that specific story, but I believe it.
Again.
That seems true as well. I mean, there was a demand. I mean, basically, there was a demand for commodities,
Sure.
and that was like when China was going through its big boom, its transition from communist to its modern day capitalist, system it's got going on now. A lot of that advancement that China made is by the commodification of their goods and of their processes. And tea definitely got hit hard with that one. And So essentially, they were able to exponentially grow the market of dark puers
Mm-hmm.
by reducing that needed time for fermentation from 10 or 20 years down to just a few months.
And I know that even then, though, there's like still like a lot of aging potential for like the Shou Puerh, because even though it's like simulating that longer age time
Mm-hmm.
with the processing and the wet piling, which I'm sure we'll talk about, there's even still market for like aged even further past that. Like I've seen samples of like mid 90s Shou Puerh, and I'm just, oh my god, I can't even imagine how like muddy that is.
Yeah. And something else to it is true. You could continue to age a tea. You can age any tea and it's
Right.
going to change, even a white tea or I mean even a matcha tea or tencha, which is the raw form of matcha. When that ages over time, it does improve in time. So the same thing will happen with Shou Puerh, but with the Shou Puerh, the reason why I find it very important to define it as being the commodification of pu'er tea is that commodities rely on quantity. They rely on scale. Like
Sure.
the literal process that the tea goes through requires mass in order to generate the temperatures to make that fermentation process begin. It's essentially composting.
Right.
And the tea gets composted. And we're talking like 3 tons per batch. So you need lots of mass. And when you're dealing with lots of mass, then you start dealing in lower prices. The farmers getting lower prices. When farmers start getting lower prices, the care for quality, the care for goodness, authenticity is lost as well.
Sure.
And so that's why a lot of Shou Puerh first and foremost, is not made with the highest quality raw material. The good stuff is better sent to where it's going to be higher valued.
Right.
So, more of the commodity minded leaf is going there. So that's the first thing. The raw material is probably, hugely treated with agricultural chemicals. And then in the process itself, we have fermentation process rely upon biology,
Right.
microbiology.
Say it's a
And
live organism,
yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, anybody who's ever done any at-home brewing, anything like that, knows how important sanitation is
Right.
for proper processing. Like, even one little off germ in your bottle that you're brewing in can mess up the entire flora and completely mess up the final product. And that happens in these tea processing facilities, which have a very different sanitation standard than we have. As far as like cigarette smoking and barefoot and, just these large spaces that don't really like generate the money to support, an ISO certified sanitation facility. Sure. And so, people say that they've tried Shou Puerh, and they've found it to be very fishy.
Yeah, fishy is a thing that I hear a lot.
And that's why. That's the wrong fermentation going on. The wrong little buggies are in there doing their work and causing the off aromas, the off flavors. And then also competing with resources for the good buggies that are actually doing the good fermentation on it. So for the most part,
it's a technical term.
The buggies, yeah. Because it's both. It encompasses a lot of different organisms. It's not just yeast. I believe that there are bacteria as well that are, beneficial part of that ecosystem. Kind of like how, kombucha works with the SCOBY. But I just like, for the most part, that's why I don't have a comparative for this tea, because I don't touch that stuff. Like, for me, it's not worth the value. And for the most part, here in the US market, the trailblazers that have introduced Chinese tea and introduced pu'er tea into the US market have heavily focused on educating the market on these fermented teas. And a lot of that does have to do with the commodification, right? Because those teas are more readily available, they're more affordable, they're less risky to order and export to the US and do business with them in the US. And so a lot of people have been exposed to this type of tea through, some sus sources.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to have this tea. We started distributing this tea back in 2015, and it's been really popular. And it's called Small Batch. And should we jump into tasting, and I can tell the story while we
yeah.
brewing and the tasting?
Well, we're getting brewing here. I do have a comparative, and I picked this one specifically because we have this is a small batch pu'er. So I have a sample of a Yunnan sourcing brand Last Laugh Right Pu'er cake from 2019. So basically what I'm doing is trying to compare just a more mass-produced Shou Puerh with this smaller batch, and not mass-produced in the same fashion as like if it were from like Shagwan or something like that, but still.
Yeah.
So this is, I'm showing mine on my screen here, but this is my little chunk of Pu'er. I'm just gonna warm everything up.
Sweet.
Ooh, the dry leaf on the Nannuoshan small batch, the one that you sent me.
Okay.
Since I'm
Yeah.
struggling, apparently my brain is not making connections.
Yeah.
It's got this like kind of like caramel aroma around that kind of almost dirt kind of scent to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that caramel. It is quite sweet. It's like sweet dirt. I mean, people always ask that. They're like, "What? Dirt smells good? When did dirt smell good?"
Well, it's I feel like it's less dirt and more just earth, right? Like
Yeah.
it's this kind of like mineral kind of quality. It's this almost it's not just like dirt, you know? It's not just boring dirt. Like there's richness to it.
It's not boring dirt. But yeah, dirt, even boring dirt. I mean, what is boring? Like
Yeah.
for me, boring is like monocultured, nutrient deprived, water deprived. What we're talking about here is like really hardy, nutritious, earthy soil.
That the wet leaf there after I rinse is like the caramel kind of like turns into like a caramel chocolate type. It's like a little.
You don't need to rinse this tea, by the way, but
Do I not?
well,
Then I will not.
it's clean. It's clean.
Then I will
I
not.
don't know about that other one.
Oh, I'm definitely rinsing the other one. 100%. There was no question about it. I'm 100% rinsing
Yeah, this is a small batch. So I guess that's a good segue. I can start
Yeah.
telling the difference of small batch versus normal processing. So, as I was saying, this was a modern advancement in tea processing technology developed in about the 1970s. Now, remember the not the Industrial Revolution. That's already long past, but the
Yeah.
Cultural Revolution. But it's all connected to the industrial, like the same ethos of like efficiency and whatever.
Sure.
But the Cultural Revolution was a very dark time in China's history and posed a big challenge to the tea culture of China, which is the longest running history of the whole world. But a lot of the business, the craftsmanship, it was all sacrificed during the Cultural Revolution for the sake of the state. And so, right, this is communist time, so everything gained ownership through the state was run by the state, and that included all tea production. So it was illegal for a tea farmer to produce their own tea and sell it into the market. So
Got
any
it.
farmer, even if they were doing artisanal craft, had to abandon that for the sake of the state. And the state did things very differently. They ran everything very differently. And so in Yunnan, the Menghai tea factory, which is very close to Nannuoshan, where this tea comes from, that was the main tea factory that did develop the expedited fermentation process for tea. And yeah, they were just turning out large quantities for the growing international market, which I is very likely that Hong Kong played a big role in that. I don't doubt that.
Yeah. That's just something I read somewhere. I don't.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. I mean, when it comes to the aged pours, it's all Hong Kong and Taipei anyway that has really driven that market. So Menghai tea factories, where all this was going down, even like all of the old trees that we like revere and talk about now with all the deep roots that we get all excited about as tea nerds, back in those days in like the 1970s and 1980s, those trees were completely valueless. Like if you were to harvest the leaf from those trees and then harvest the leaf from some really young, clonal trees, when you would take the leaf to the factory, to the Menghai tea factory, the government-owned, government-run tea factory to be sold, you would get the same price for it. And it was like pennies. It was like nothing. The tea farmers were very poor. And so those old trees lost their value. And that was when you got to the point of time where a lot of them were getting cut down.
Oh my
because
gosh.
they were having, yes, Colin, this is a very serious thing that is still happening to this day, actually, because there are some communities that their tea has not become marketable yet. Like in Yunnan, Jishanbana, all the mountains of Jishanbana, which is where Nannuoshan is, like those farmers are all fine. Like the market knows about them. They are no longer selling their leaf for pennies to the Meng tea factory. Like they're able to be their own tea maker and their own tea master and do their own business and get paid well for it. But like in Guizhou, for instance, that's where a lot of the modern day commodity teas are coming from. They also have ancient tea trees there, but the farmers are not paid well for them. Like the market does not know about them and appreciate them. They just know them for the cheap tea. And so a lot of the farmers are cutting down those trees because they have more value as like burning wood than they do as a tea tree. So just a little side note about how sad that is.
That is really sad. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a sad reality. But the tea maker from this family, Li Shulin, he was working at the Meng tea factory with his father. He was a engineer. Him and his father were engineer in the fermentation piling area. Mm-hmm. And so when this family in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when the tea market started, when all the millionaires started coming up, and then they found tea to be like this niche luxury product that could be an investment for them. That's really what drove the Yunnan tea industry to become like where it is now. And that encouraged farmers to start, growing their own tea, making their own tea, seeking out more valued leaves, such as the older trees or the purple tree or whatever. But he couldn't, so he left the Meng tea factory and started making tea himself, but he couldn't make the Shou Puerh because it's a different process.
There's a lot more.
Like 3 tons of leaf to do it. And so he was small scale, but it took him 7 years of, engineering and figuring it out. And he came up with this, and he was one of the first producers. It's now a trend across several different mountains. You will find some tea factories and tea makers that have figured it out, but it's very trade secret type of a thing. Like no one's going around talking about how they do it. Right.
Because that makes sense. And so is that what we're talking about when we talk about small batch? It's not these 3 tons. It's
Yep. It's not 3 tons. It's just, in this case, I think it's like 27 kilos is like the smallest batch you'll make compared to 3 tons.
This is clean.
Duh.
and I don't mean, okay, hang on. Let me clear.
Sorry.
No. You're right. You're right. No, you're right. I walked into that one. I just mean that like this is like the most crisp Shou Puerh I think I've ever encountered, and this is extremely different from anything else in that it's not. One of the reasons why I don't like Shou Puerh usually is I feel like it's just such a heavy tea. The energy might be there, that good chi might be there, I guess, but it's just such a heavy tea. This is not at all.
No fishiness, not one bit.
Mm-mm. And I mean, I've had the last laugh cake before, and there's no fishiness in that either, but it's still this like dense, heavy tea. But like this one is almost refreshing. It makes me want to go back for more.
Yeah. I know I'm not trying to break the fourth wall or whatever we call it, but I just got to share this one. Armadillo says, 1 small steep for man, 1 giant steep for mankind. That's this tea. I think that's, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal.
That is a big deal.
To develop this. And now there are other tea producers, and I've met other tea farmers that told me that there are factories they can send their tea to. Like they don't know how to do it themselves, but there's factories in their area where they can do this small batch piling process. It doesn't seem like rocket science to me, but I guess there is. And so the farmer, Li Shulin, he's never even shown us this process because, he worked too hard. But he's not the only one. Yeah.
I am just blown away by that. There's a tea that it reminds me of. I'm trying to come up with what it is. There's something that it makes me think of like another tea that I've tried. But no, it's just that's it reminds me almost of like brownies, like fresh baked brownies, I guess, almost, with a little bit of caramel.
Gives me an idea. I should come up with a brownie recipe with this tea.
You could do it.
Yeah,
Definitely
it'd
do
be
it.
easy.
So
Easy.
you're talking about like other producers doing small batch, and what's interesting is that I until you sent me this and I looked this specific one up, there was only one other Western tea seller, really just he that was selling small batch Shou Puerh. Mm-hmm. And everybody that I know, like through like online tea communities and stuff, talks about it as if it's like this like super goofy, like extra thing. Like, of course, this guy is doing small batch Shou Puerh, and it's super interesting, I guess, that this is actually more of a norm than one would let on. And I think it speaks very much again to kind of how disconnected even those of us that like really try and work on like how they source their teas and like really kind of drink their teas in a much more intimate fashion than just bag cup, whatever. But just how disconnected we are, because I didn't know that, and it's kind of fascinating to me that each farm is kind of coming up with their own method as well. I guess this is just a much more prominent thing than I originally understood. And by the way, this blows the other one out of the water.
It may be not as prominent. It's definitely in the Western market not as prominent, and even in China, it's not as prominent. Because it's like if someone's going to source directly from the grower, mm-hmm. more than likely they're going to want to age it themselves. They're going to want to be a part of that aging process. But, there is some demand for clean Shou Puerh. But yeah, it's more common. Like whenever I first started working with this grower with this tea, I thought it was like the biggest thing in the world, and he made it out to be that way as well. But since spending more time in China, I've come to learn that there are other growers. It is a very common thing, and so I think it may be something that we'll be seeing a lot more in the U.S. because like clean tea is something, especially like newer business owners that are just getting into selling tea, into setting up a tea shop or something, they're going to prioritize a clean source versus,
would hope.
A fishy source. You'd hope, but that's what I specialize in doing. I specialize in working with startups and tea enthusiasts that are just getting into it. And that tends to be a priority for a lot of them, especially if they're starting from ground zero. Now, if they have a tea shop that's been in business for 10 years that has a full stock of all the flavored teas and whatever else, it is really hard to convince them to change their source. But if they're starting from ground zero, the majority of small business owners are wanting to do things transparency. They're wanting to do things clean. They're wanting to know all the distribution of monies. So much to a point that it's almost detrimental to my business because, the internet has empowered us so much that we almost assume that everything should be like efficient. Like, a lot of these small business owners that are expecting to start out slow are also expecting to like do their own importing which is doable. It's just not efficient.
Right.
It doesn't start becoming efficient until you have economies of scale and those types of things. And so, but I'm just telling this story because it is a priority for new business owners to want to have transparency, almost so much so that they don't even want to work with someone like me. They want to be direct to the source.
Which is reasonable. I can understand that. But I also know that like with like cost of shipping, in terms of like weight and amount and stuff, you're always going to have a cheaper product from the larger seller. no matter what. And I'm sure that kind of plays into it a little bit as well. And just in the fact that like you have sourced this tea, so it's here, I mean, I think that's probably huge, just because, something that I know that, you kind of talk about a lot in terms of, your business, is that there's kind of this issue of it's difficult for these smaller farmers to get their tea to Western markets where they could sell, to larger markets where they could sell outside of, their own regions and stuff. And that's probably even more so difficult in this case here of Shou Puerh than in many other places, I guess, just because of how severely established Munghai and Shaguan factories are. I mean, they're like legendary in a way, in whether that's good or bad, is neither here nor there, but they have the power to do this, and so they're always going to. It's like Walmart, But
Friggin' Walmart.
God damn it, Walmart.
Hey, Colin, I think we've gotten a good idea here from a Reddit viewer on a new benchmark for our efforts, our social media tea efforts that we've got going on here.
Sure.
So Palmetto mentioned Kit Boga. Kit Boga? Do you not know Kit Boga?
No.
Kit Boga is a Twitch streamer, also a YouTuber that like does live tech scamming pranks.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah. So I know this about him, and the idea had passed my head, but now it's really passing my head. He starts out every stream drinking a cup of tea. He's always drinking tea, but it's probably a tea bag or something. So I think it'd be cool to make it a goal to get some tea to Kit Boga.
Oh, that would be fun.
Some good tea. Yeah, maybe we can give him some leads of calling tea suppliers in Asia and like scamming them, prank calling them. Not scamming them, but like getting them to admit the dark secrets of their tea.
That would be funny. That would be really fun.
Yeah, we got to get more influencers. Some big names are getting into tea. I think like Brad Pitt, he announced that he's got some RTD sparkling tea beverage that he's invested in.
Every celebrity has like some like alcohol or other thing that they do. I cannot tell you at work how often we get pitched Bon Jovi's rosé or Danica Patrick's rosé or all these and I'm like, why does everybody have a rosé?
Rosé all day. That's what they say.
That is the name of a rosé as well that we used to carry. I'm on my second steep here, this like the Nannuoshan, and it's much. I don't know. The body's opening up a lot. I got a much darker liquor out of it for barely steeping it any more time. But is there any part of the processing that you can tell us about? Like, because since like it's kind of a secret, like what can you tell us?
So like composting, I think a lot of people have done composting at home. And so I think that's a good reference to sharing the process for this type of tea. So fermentation is a biological. So it's either going to be the yeast or the bacteria that's like feeding off of and changing the chemistry of the tea. Those processes, just like when you leave your food out of the refrigerator, it's going to spoil faster than when you put it into the refrigerator. Temperature is one of those things that can affect the rate at which these reactions happen. Of course, if you heat it too hot, then you can denature, the organisms and kill them.
Yeah, now we've got other issues.
Yeah. But, it's like they actually like the warmth. So just like with composting, your goal is to get all of your green waste to pile so it creates the warmth, which will accelerate that rate. But you also need to turn it, right? Because you want even processing, because the stuff that's on the outside of the pile is going to be at a lower temperature than the stuff at the center of the pile. So you have to constantly be rotating, just like with compost. But it's the exact same thing. I mean, the processes are different, obviously, but the concept of how temperature affects the rate at which organisms do their processes makes a difference. And it's a really fast difference. It's the difference between,
right.
10 years and 2 months. It's a big difference.
So I've seen estimates that depending on how the processing is done, you could technically simulate up to like 40, 50 years of aging. But I mean, again, I'm not an expert, so I have no idea. But if I'm to understand correctly, like that humidity is created by the leaf then?
Yeah, so there warmth and moistness. So when you keep the leaf heaped like that, it's going to keep the moisture in. So yes, humidity will be higher and temperature is higher as well.
Yeah. Something that I kind of wanted to return back to as well, that you had mentioned earlier was about quality and cost. Because something that's interesting, I feel, I think a lot of people, I think is a misconception between Shou and Shou Puerh, is that if you were to take the same raw leaf, the same raw Mao Cha, and process Shou Puerh and Shou Puerh out of it, the Shou Puerh would technically cost more, would it not? Considering the fact that there's much more labor involved in the production of it. And so it's very strange that this like kind of misconception almost that Shou Puerh is cheaper than Shou Puerh kind of exists, because again, we kind of get back into where the value comes from, I guess too. And I can understand, that you prefer something that's more naturally aged. Like you don't like the taste of like if you get something that tastes like a pile, like that's not super attractive to some people. Like I can understand that. But and so I can understand how that like distinction is created, but it seems very strange because I could definitely see like this small batch Shou Puerh that you've provided here, like probably retailing at a similar price to a fairly higher quality Shou Puerh, just because of it is a good quality Shou Puerh.
It is, yeah. And it is coming from high quality leaf.
Right. And that's what I was trying to say.
Is when you don't need 3 tons of leaf, and that's 3 tons of finished tea. If you don't need that much tea, then you can focus, on just, specific trees or, older trees. These certainly aren't gushu. This is not gushu. They would never use gushu for this type of tea, but they could use dashu. These are probably like 60 to 80-year-old trees that the tea is coming from, which is, pretty good quality.
I guess my main question then on that regard is that like if this is the higher quality, and because this is something that I've kind of been thinking about a lot lately and kind of like trying to work through, is just that if this is this higher quality, and like when you're buying from those larger sellers, I guess I'm always curious, like what's the best way to go about sourcing that? Because responsible sourcing is, I know, something that you're very big on with the transparent sourcing, and it's something that like through kind of getting to know you has become something that I do consider a lot when I'm looking for my teas. But I don't know if it weren't for having met you, having known about your store, if I'd have ever come across anything like this on my own. And I guess that's something that's difficult too, is accessibility of this, which is the Walmart issue again, because the accessibility is kept down.
Yeah. Well, there's like 20 or so different tea shops in the US that are sourcing this tea through Tealet. So I know it's
somebody's got it.
Accessible. Somebody's got it somewhere. But yeah, you're right. These things don't really come that accessible because, the wholesalers and the large scale, brokers, it's much easier for them to be doing this business if they're working with lower price, materials.
Right.
So that's why, a lot of the factory Shou Puerhs are the main ones that make their way here. And there's even been campaigns to discourage people from drinking Shou Puerh because it's too wild. Like the energy is too wild. It needs to age in order for it to be digestible. And, a lot of those campaigns were created just to, popularize darker, deeper fermented tea, kind of demonizing the green stuff, which is kind of silly.
I think I remember you talking about that last time, or at least when we had the sticky rice shung, and part of me wonders if like what the cause for that is, what the and I'm just how does that come about? Why do people do that? And I mean, there's the marketing aspect of it, but I guess is there just too much Shou Puerh? Or are we just trying to like save the Shou Puerh for other people, not the masses? I don't know, but yeah, sorry.
It's a challenge because it's like when you're selling a product, you want to make sure that all your marketing is in alignment with your product being the best.
Sure.
Right. So I think that's why that happened. Yeah. When like, if you really were learning from a tea master, if you're really learning tea from like a high level tea artist that's really an expert, more than likely, like they're going to tell you that Shung tea is better than the most Shou Puerh that's available on the market. And so, you want to make, if you're selling Shou Puerh, only Shou Puerh, you want to make sure that your customers aren't, steered in the wrong direction. So, I mean, the example of this is the music festival scenes.
Sure.
We've talked about this, how you notice some, overlapping between those communities. Yeah, there are a lot of tea servers at music festivals. And a lot of the very early servers, the people that were doing it very early on, their teachers were some of these folks that were importing tea, mostly Shou Puerh, cakes of large factory Shou Puerh. And the tea servers, as well as the people that have sat down with the tea servers and been introduced to tea, were all they're kind of new age, that's kind of the culture there. They were all introduced to Shou Puerh or Puerh in general. So it's not even a difference between Shou Puerh or Puerh. Like they're just taught Puerh, and that it should be a medicine, and that it's only truly going to be medicinal for you if it's thick and dark, and if you feel it in your core, which, the energetics of this tea, we certainly could talk about that, and for the most part, most dark teas are going to have like a really strong central deep chi to them.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're taught. They're taught that that's how you decipher value in Puerh. If it's not dark, it's not good. They don't even know the difference between Shung and Shou. That was my experience of sitting with tea with some of these folks, because I'd be pouring like a really good quality, like young Gushu Shung, and they say, oh no, Puerh is my medicine. I only drink, if it's dark and if it has like a deep richness in my belly. And I'm like, well, you're missing out on a lot. And then
really?
Yeah, you're missing out on a lot. And it was all the same story of like, oh, well, my tea master taught me this, and this is where I learned it. And it's like,
always, something that I've attempted to incorporate into my mindset of life is that your teachers are lovely people, but at the end of the day, you have to do some of your own learning. And I feel like some of the most like problematic and toxic language and knowledge comes from single sources, right? And trusting that single source as the only source. And I just find that to be another like good example of that, just because tea is just such a wide, vast ranged idea, plant, thing, whatever. And I mean, my experience with one tea could be completely different than yours. And so it's strange to me when people like shoehorn themselves into that kind of like, this person says this and that is that. type of ideal. So I don't know. This makes me think about that a little bit. Bitcoin's getting real interested.
Yeah, Bitcoin's like, I want to go into your lab. That's all I want to do. That's just such a common issue in tea, not just with Chinese tea, but even, kind of the gatekeeping that happens. And it's almost like if you get into the business of tea, there's this culture of like, that's what builds your brand. Your brand needs to be some type of gatekeeping service.
Yeah. It's recently I've been extending that as well to sommeliers and wine.
Yeah.
There was a time where I thought I might want to pursue a sommelier certification. At this point, I'm like, nah, sommeliership is just gatekeeping.
That's funny. That's funny.
Oh, is that so, Bitcoin?
Yeah, Bitcoin. What are you thinking about? I don't know. He's like, maybe he's complaining about this whole gatekeeping thing. He's like, I'll gatekeep all of the treats. I will gatekeep all the dog culture.
He parks himself in your lap.
Well, don't you have a cat in your lap too?
Oh, she ran off. She's licking herself. Okay, it's bath time. My bad.
Oh, bath time.
Yes, of course. I don't know. Do you have anything else you wanna like talk about with the tea at all?
Well, you never even drank the other tea.
Oh, I did.
Or have you? You did. Okay, so why don't we hear, like, in real time, or as real time as possible, your experience of having the two side by side?
So there's something about, like, you talk about wonky energy, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that can almost be like extended in this conversation to dirty energy. And when I was
ooh.
Yeah, and not in the fun way. What was interesting is that the last laugh, and it's compressed, so you have to take that into account a little bit. But it felt heavy, right? And I felt like and I feel like that's kind of one of my experiences with Shou Puerh, and why I've kind of preferred Shou Puerh as a kind of in comparison, is just this one just felt so heavy, and I felt like you got a real good heat seal right there.
I did, yeah. It was empty too.
I just feel like I feel energized from the small batch Shou Puerh, and I feel there's like this. I don't know. I've been getting super like hippy dippy, goofy with my tea sessions lately. I feel like I have a better picture of, and that's possibly just because I'm talking to somebody who's met the person who made the tea. I feel like I have a better picture of who made my tea with the small batch show, right? And just that I very much felt like I could taste. I didn't taste the production in it, but I could taste that it had that production, I guess, if that makes sense. But also,
that makes sense.
I'm really, the last laugh compared to, I pulled the last laugh cake because I kind of liked it the last time I had it, and now I've had this one and I'm pissed.
Who made the tea? Yeah, this tea, we're drinking a beautiful Shou Puerh made by a tea master in Yunnan, China, Nannuoshan, called Li Shu Lin. Li is his last name. A lot of Asian names, the last name comes first, so I know that's confusing. But Li Shu Lin is his name. I just had somebody in chat ask who made the tea.
Oh yeah, no, I very much enjoyed this one, and you were definitely right. And I mean, something that I always try and tell myself is that if I don't like something, one of two things is the case. I either A, just don't like it, or B, I just haven't found the right one yet. And this one is very different from the other Shou Puerhs I've had. But